Pressure steady.
I skipped school and stood in line for 4 hours with my friends to see Return of the Jedi. The entire theatre sat in silence through the film's closing moments, then suddenly erupted in cheers and applause. When Vader fell, when Luke stood motionless in black, when the fires burned on Endor, I walked out of the theatre with the feeling that I had just witnessed something enormous, something complete. But the older I got, the more I realised. Return of the Jedi was never a happy ending. Did you know that the real face of Vader when the mask comes off is not David Prowse, the man who wore the armour through all 3 films? Or that Harrison Ford once passionately argued for killing Han Solo in the 3rd film to prove that no one was safe? And that the Rebels' final victory in the movie actually comes at the cost of more than 2 million lives? And here are 20 behind-the-scenes truths that make Return of the Jedi a far more complex and haunting film than you remember. 20. Anakin's return. Not a glorious ending, but the right one. In most viewers' memories, the moment Vader saves Luke is remembered as Anakin's return. But what makes it painful isn't the action, it's the price. Vader doesn't kill the Emperor in anger. He does it in desperation, watching his son be slowly murdered. It is the final reflex of a father. Anakin is not absolved. He is only allowed to come back in the last moment. When the mask comes off, what we see is not a monster, just a weary face, wanting to look at his son with his own eyes before he dies. That's why this scene doesn't need grand dialogue, it needs silence. The making of the scene was heavy as well. David Prowse was excluded from the most important moment of the character's life because Lucas suspected him of leaking information. Sebastian Shaw was chosen instead, bringing an Anakin who feels deeply human and fragile. Anakin does not die as a legend. He dies as a man who went down the wrong path for too long, but managed to turn back at the final crossroads. Return of the Jedi does not end with victory. It ends with incomplete redemption, and precisely because it is incomplete, the ending lingers for so long. 19. Luke's green lightsaber was never truly Luke's. The first time I saw Luke ignite the green lightsaber in Return of the Jedi, I thought it was a declaration. The green blade, paired with black clothing and a cold stance, made Luke look like someone who had forged himself into a Jedi, no longer the boy he once was. But years later, learning the behind-the-scenes truth cracked that feeling. Mark Hamill revealed that the green lightsaber Luke uses to fight Vader on Death Star 2 was actually the special effects lightsaber prop once held by Alec Guinness in A New Hope. Not a replica, not a new design. The very same saber. On screen, Luke is trying to break free from Obi-Wan. He calls him Obi-Wan with bitterness, no longer Ben. He realizes he was guided by half-truths. He wants to stand on his own, to define himself. Yet in reality, Luke is holding something that once belonged to his teacher. Ironically, this behind-the-scenes detail fits perfectly with canon. Luke builds his new lightsaber using notes and materials found in Obi-Wan's old home on Tatooine, which means that Green Blade is not just a weapon, it is a legacy. Luke may change blade colour, clothing and attitude, but what he carries into the defining battle of his life is still part of the past, of the teacher he both trusts and doubts. 18. Han Solo survives not because of heroism, but cold logic. Have you ever noticed something strange when watching Return of the Jedi? Han Solo survives everything: space gangsters, carbonite, the Sarlacc, all-out war. But few people know that what nearly killed him wasn't the Empire, but a conference table. Harrison Ford did not sign a trilogy contract like Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher. Bringing him back for Jedi required real negotiation. And throughout that process, one idea kept floating around. Kill Han Solo. Ford wanted it. Lawrence Kasdan did too. To them, Han should die in a sacrificial moment. A beautiful death would raise the stakes, showing audiences that Star Wars was no longer safe. If Han could die, anyone could. But George Lucas said no, and the most often cited reason sounds brutally plain: toys. A dead hero doesn't sell toys. It sounds crude, practical, even distasteful. Yet there was another reason that's mentioned less often. The Empire Strikes Back ended with a hanging question. Is Han alive? If Jedi rescued Han only to kill him soon after, audiences would feel emotionally betrayed, as if all previous hope had been meaningless. So Han lives to the end, and here lies the paradox. The scruffiest, most skeptical, most grounded character is saved by the safest possible decision. 17. The final confrontation. Luke, Vader, the Emperor. There is an easy misunderstanding about the final battle in Return of the Jedi. Many remember it as a lightsaber duel. In truth, it is a psychological war staged from the very beginning, with Luke as the most important piece on the board. The Emperor does not need to fight. He only needs to arrange things. Luke, the fleet, Endor, the unfinished Death Star. Everything is a multi-layered trap, where every choice Luke makes is pushed in the same direction: to fight in anger. That is why the most important moment is not when lightsabers clash, but when Luke surrenders and walks into the throne room unarmed. This is the lesson learned from Empire. Last time, Luke arrived with blasters, a sword, and a hunger to win, and he was utterly defeated. This time, he comes to talk. Luke does not come to kill Vader. He comes to call Anakin, but the Emperor understands this weakness perfectly. He patiently pushes Luke into fighting by invoking Leia, and Luke explodes. When he cuts off Vader's hand, the image echoes Empire. But this time, Luke stops. He looks at his father's mechanical hand, then at his own, and realizes that one more step is all it would take to become the very thing he fears. Luke throwing away his lightsaber is not a victory, it is a refusal. I am a Jedi, like my father before me. For the first time in Star Wars, a character wins by refusing to play by the manipulator's rules. 16. Endor, guerrilla warfare, jungle, and the shadow of the Vietnam War. As a child, I used to think the Battle of Endor was just a fairy tale for kids, little bears beating big robots. But the older I got, the more that battle began to unsettle me in a very specific way. Because Endor is not fantasy, it is guerrilla warfare. George Lucas never hid the inspiration: the Vietnam War. A small force with inferior technology facing an overwhelming war machine. The Ewoks do not win because they are strong. They win because they know the terrain. They are patient. And they fight on their own terms. Ropes, stones, wooden traps. Things that look meaningless against ATSTs until the massive machines crash face first into the jungle mud. Lucas deliberately places the Empire, symbol of order, technology and discipline, into an environment where all of those advantages become liabilities. Endor's message is cold. Victory does not come from ultimate weapons, but from collective will and the ability to endure longer than your enemy. The Empire loses not because the Ewoks are stronger, but because it does not understand the kind of war it has entered. 15. Yoda is the only Jedi to die of natural causes on screen. There is a moment in Return of the Jedi that has always made me uneasy, even when I was young and couldn't quite name the feeling. It is Yoda's death. Just a damp hut on Dagobah, pale green light, and a creature too tired to maintain any legendary posture. Yoda lies there, speaking slowly, as if every word has to be dragged out of the little time he has left. And then he closes his eyes. If you think about it, almost every Jedi we see dies in a way loaded with meaning. Obi-Wan willingly vanishes to save Luke. Qui-Gon is murdered. Luke sacrifices himself. Jedi deaths are usually symbolic final acts, only Yoda's is not. He dies of old age. In a universe where the Force can lift starships, where light and dark decide the fate of the galaxy, Yoda is defeated by the one thing that cannot be fought tight, and that is precisely what makes this moment more haunting than any heroic sacrifice in the entire saga. 14. The title, Return or Revenge. There are film titles we know so well that we never question them. Return of the Jedi is one of those. The name has been printed on VHS tapes, disc covers, and embedded in the memory of an entire generation to the point where it feels inevitable. But as a child, I never realised that changing just one word could have sent the entire spirit of the film down a completely different path. Return of the Jedi sounds gentle, and for that very reason, Lawrence Kasdan, the co-writer, didn't like it. To him, this was the finale of an epic saga, and the title lacked force. The solution seemed logical. Revenge of the Jedi. A title that tells audiences this will be the final act of vengeance. Lucas initially agreed, but the deeper he went into the film, the more uncomfortable he became with one problem. Return of the Jedi is not a story about revenge, and Luke, at the decisive moment, refuses to kill his father. Revenge, morally speaking, runs completely against what the Jedi stand for. So Lucas reversed course, but too late. The result was a strange paradox. Posters had been printed, trailers released, toys manufactured, all bearing the name Revenge of the Jedi. Then, right before the release date, the title was changed back to Return of the Jedi. For fans following the production, it was a shock. But in hindsight, that confusion perfectly reflects the film's spirit. This is a story that did not choose the easiest title to sell, but the one truest to its characters. 13. Luke takes the high ground, a memory Vader never escaped.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
You remembers that line? Obi-Wan has taught you well. The first time you hear it, it passes quickly. Amid clashing lightsabers and the film's relentless pace, it sounds like a dry compliment from a defeated enemy. Vader acknowledges Luke's progress. That's all. But after Revenge of the Sith, the line becomes a wound. In the final duel, Luke knocks Vader down a staircase and stands above him. The high ground. A visual composition that seems accidental until you remember Mustafar. Obi-Wan stood above, Anakin jumped and lost everything. Now Vader stands where he once stood, defeated, forced downward, looking up at another Skywalker holding the same power to end it all. When he says, "Obi-Wan has taught you well," it is not just praise, it is memory. Vader remembers. He remembers the moment he believed himself invincible. The mistake that destroyed his life, and now he sees his son standing in the same position. But Luke does not jump, and that difference changes everything. Luke learns from Obi-Wan without repeating Anakin. He has the high ground, and does not use it to finish the fight. Star Wars is often remembered as a story of light defeating darkness. But this moment reveals something deeper. Memory does not disappear, even when one becomes a monster. Vader never forgot Mustafar, and that memory opens the final crack through which Anakin can return. 12. Alien languages, science fiction with very human roots. One of the reasons Star Wars always feels real is that not everyone speaks the same language. The galaxy sounds messy, confusing, and sometimes inconvenient. And that is exactly what makes it feel closer to life than to a sanitized fantasy world. What few people notice is that these alien languages have very earthly origins. In Return of the Jedi, Jabba the Hutt's language is built from Quechua, the language of the Inca Empire. This choice was not random. Quechua carries an ancient rhythm, a sense of authority, and ties to a civilization that once dominated and then collapsed. Nien Nunb, Lando's co-pilot, speaks Kikuyu, a Kenyan language. And Ewok speech, which sounds like children making things up, is inspired by Tibetan and Kalmyk, languages associated with tribal cultures, spiritual traditions, and lives closely bound to nature. Star Wars does not create an alien world by inventing everything from scratch. It borrows very real fragments of our own world, places them in a different context, and lets audiences feel the diversity before they understand it. 11. Ewoks are never named in the film. Back then, when watching Return of the Jedi, we all assumed we knew exactly who the Ewoks were. They appear all over Endor, run across the screen, shout their quirky sounds, and, most importantly, help the rebels win the battle. In my memory, Ewok felt too obvious a concept to ever need explaining. But as I grew older and watched more closely, I realised something very strange. No one in the film ever calls them Ewoks. Not Han, not Leia, not Luke, not even C-3PO, the one worshipped as a god, ever names them. There is no line like "Thank you Ewoks" or "Wicket helped us." The species name appears only in the end credits, where very few viewers ever look. This turns the Ewoks into a peculiar presence. They are there. They act. They sacrifice. Yet, in the world of the main characters, they are almost never identified. The Ewoks are not named allies, but part of the environment, like the forest, the terrain, something the Empire simply does not understand. 10. The Rancor's roar came from a small dog. The first time I saw the Rancor, I remember shrinking back in my seat. Not because of how it looked, but because of its roar. The sound that came from that creature's throat felt as if the entire room was shaking. A being you couldn't negotiate with, couldn't escape. Years later, learning the truth made that fear funny in a very Star Wars way. The Rancor's roar didn't come from a lion, a bear, or any ferocious beast. It came from the small dog next door to Ben Burtt, the legendary sound designer of Star Wars. Burt recorded the dog's barks and growls, then lowered the pitch, stretched them out, and distorted the sound. And that's how the Rancor was born. Once you know this, you can never look at the Rancor the same way again. Because behind the most terrifying creature in Jabba's dungeon is something utterly ordinary. A small dog making a racket over its territory. And the more you think about it, the more perfectly it fits the spirit of Star Wars. The things that frighten us most on screen often come from very familiar things in real life, just placed in a different context, at a different scale, with a different sound. 9. Lando's disappearing glove. Amid the chaos on Jabba's sail barge, where everything explodes, people are thrown into the desert, and the Sarlacc waits with its mouth wide open. There is a detail so small that most viewers never notice it. Lando. Calrissian drops his glove, or rather, the glove simply disappears. In a wide shot, when Lando is knocked off the barge and clings on desperately, you can clearly see him wearing black gloves. But when the film cuts to a close-up, the gloves are gone. The real-world reason is simple. The stunt performer needed gloves for protection while hanging. Billy D. Williams did not. 2 shots, 2 people, 1 character, and no one went back to fix it because no one thought the audience would look that closely. What's amusing is that Lando has always been the most fluid character. He switches sides, changes outfits, shifts roles, and now he even swaps gloves in an instant. 8. Power behind the scenes, George Lucas versus Hollywood. After The Empire Strikes Back, many people thought George Lucas was at the height of his power. Ironically, that was also when he began clashing head-on with Hollywood. It started with the film credits. Lucas wanted the crew credits to appear at the end of the film, so audiences wouldn't be pulled out of the Star Wars world at the beginning. With A New Hope, the guilds let it slide, but with Empire, they fined Lucas over $250,000 and even threatened to pull the film from theatres. Lucas saw this as an insult. He withdrew from the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and even the MPAA. The consequences were immediate. Steven Spielberg, his longtime friend, was unable to direct because of guild rules. David Lynch was deemed too off-tone. David Cronenberg declined. In the end, Lucas chose Richard Marquand, a director with limited experience in effects-heavy films. This led to a paradox. Lucas had to be present on set constantly to keep the rhythm. Many later described Return of the Jedi as a film that was directed twice. 7. Over 2 million deaths, and Lando caused most of them. When we watch Return of the Jedi, we remember victory, fireworks, and relieved smiles. But when viewed through statistics, the cost of that piece is far more horrifying. According to analyses within the fandom, 2,218,448 people died in Episode 6. And the top scorer was not the Emperor, not Vader, but Lando Calrissian. When Lando pilots the Falcon into the core of Death Star 2 and destroys it from within, he kills 1,844,137 people, mostly engineers, soldiers, and personnel working inside the station. They never appear on screen. They have no faces, no dialogue, but they exist. This detail is not meant to accuse Lando. It raises an uncomfortable question. In war, heroism and catastrophe can belong to the same person, depending only on perspective. 6. The Emperor's chair, power held together with tape. Emperor Palpatine appears seated, barely moving, gently rotating his chair as if controlling the entire galaxy. He looks like a spider at the center of a web, but behind that image lies a very mundane truth. The Emperor's chair was designed to rotate mechanically to convey absolute power. The problem was that it almost never worked properly. The mechanism jammed, lagged, or turned in the wrong direction. The result? Ian McDiarmid had to push the chair himself with his feet while acting. To keep it from showing in frame, the crew taped a small marker to the floor, a cue for McDiarmid to know when to stop. There's a beautiful irony here. The most powerful character in the galaxy, the master manipulator of a perfectly calculated grand design, depends on duct tape and the feel of his own feet to appear all-powerful. 5. Carrie Fisher and the Ewok kid in the stifling costume. Amid battles, monsters, and galactic power struggles, there is a small, very human story. Warwick Davis was only 11 years old at the time, stepping onto a major film set for the first time, forced to wear a thick, hot, enclosed Ewok costume for hours on end. Under long shooting conditions, it was far from easy for a child. The person who noticed this most was Carrie Fisher. She regularly checked on Davis, reminded the crew to give him breaks, and brought him cookies and chocolate milk between takes. Not out of obligation, not for PR, just an adult seeing a child who was trying his best. Years later, Davis said something very simple. She was everything an 11-year-old Ewok could hope for. In a film about empires, war, and the fate of the galaxy, this detail reminds us that sometimes the most humane part of Star Wars isn't in the light or the dark, but in how people treat each other when the cameras stop rolling. 4. 6 people for one creature, Jabba the Hutt. When Jabba the Hutt appears on screen, he feels like a living mass of power, heavy, slimy, immovable. But to create that effect required 6 people working as a single body. Inside the full-scale puppet were 3 operators, 2 controlling the arms, head, and tongue, 1 handling the massive tail. Another person lay underneath, pulling cables to make Jabba's mouth open and his sides heave as if breathing. 2 radio control operators managed the eyes, from gaze direction and eyelid movement to pupil dilation. And finally, 1 person did just one job, constantly applying gel to keep Jabba wet, unpleasant, and alive. The filthiest creature in the film was the result of the most intricate coordination. 3. The promotional film that became a legend. In 1982, a mockumentary promotional film titled Return of the Ewok was shot alongside Star Wars. Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. It told a fictionalized story of Warwick Davis being cast as Wicket, interwoven with real behind-the-scenes footage featuring Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and David Prowse. Strangely, in this film, Jedi was still referred to by its old title, Revenge of the Jedi. The project was never completed, never officially released. Only a handful of rare screenings in the UK during the 1990s and low-quality bootlegs circulating in fandom. Return of the Ewok exists as an unanswered question, a behind-the-scenes film swallowed by the very behind-the-scenes it documented. 2. A test screening that gave birth to an entire sound industry. At an early test screening, George Lucas left the theatre with a chill down his spine. Not because the film was bad, but because the sound was so poor it was almost unlistenable. Many effects were muffled, and even John Williams' music, especially Leia's theme, nearly vanished. The problem wasn't the film, it was the theatre. Sound systems at the time were simply too weak, distorting everything. Lucas reached a conclusion familiar to him. If you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. The result was THX, named after THX-1138. The goal wasn't flashy effects, but to ensure audiences heard films exactly as filmmakers intended. From one failed test screening, Lucas inadvertently reshaped sound standards for the entire film industry. 1. The highest-grossing film of 1983, despite all the behind-the-scenes controversies, Return of the Jedi delivered one clear answer upon release. Audiences had been waiting for it far too long. 3 years after Empire's cliffhanger ending, fans lined up for as long as 6 days to buy tickets. Some places even reported couples holding weddings in line. Released in May 1983, Jedi grossed over $475 million, becoming the highest-grossing film of the year, surpassing Superman 3, Jaws 3D, and even James Bond. Critical reception was generally positive. Time magazine found Jedi more satisfying than Empire. Variety criticised Mark Hamill for lacking depth, a shocking take at the time. The film won 1 Oscar and received 4 additional nominations. Return of the Jedi didn't just close a trilogy. It proved that a space fairy tale, if told with enough sincerity, could define an entire year for the world. Perhaps that is why Return of the Jedi remains such a strangely divisive film. For many, it is the weakest entry of the original trilogy. The Ewoks are too cute. The tone is sometimes too light. The climax isn't as brutal as Empire. But if you slow down, Jedi isn't trying to be a big film. It's trying to be an ending. An ending to childhood. An ending to the belief that evil can be redeemed. And an ending where victory doesn't come from killing the enemy, but from refusing to become one. If you've only ever seen Return of the Jedi as a cheerful finale, leave a comment. What is Return of the Jedi in your memory? And if you want to keep digging into classic films from a different perspective, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos.